So, some other things. Some other things. She, like I said, was pretty big on that we need to use the term Islamic extremists. I'm going to play this clip for you.
And prevented. But if not, let's stay focused on exactly who our enemy is and what we need to defeat them. Again, keeping at the forefront, keeping the American people safe.
But do you think we've gotten a clear message on that, on exactly what the threat is, who the threats are coming from, what we call them, how we identify them? You know that going into combat. I mean, you have to know who your enemy is and name it so you can defeat it.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And I think that's what's important as we look at some of these messages and some of these threats that are being posed by different groups, whether it's Boko Haram and a variety of others that go by different names. Just a few years ago, there were only 20 plus groups who were fueled by this Islamic extremist ideology and conducting these terrorist attacks. Today, there are over 40. So by identifying the single common element amongst them and recognizing that the vast majority of terrorist attacks conducted around the world for over the last decade have been conducted by groups who are fueled by this radical Islamic ideology, then once that's identified, we understand it, then we can come up with a winning strategy to defeat it, both militarily as well as ideologically, and that's how we defeat them.
I don't think that's the most concerning thing, but I do think the bottom line is words do matter, and terrorists use the term radical Islamic extremism to radicalize more people to become terrorists. And that was a right-wing talking point. I mean, listen, I always tell you, I'm going to report the truth. I'm not going to just tell you what you want to hear. Overall, I think Tulsi Gabbard, of the declared candidates, let me be clear, of the declared candidates, is the most progressive. I think she's better than Elizabeth Warren, in my view. She's definitely better than Julian Castro, who I'm going to get to in a little bit. Those are the only people who have declared that they're running for president. Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, and now Tulsi Gabbard. So she's better than both of them in my view. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't reporting what I view as concerning. And she was on Fox News a lot, which isn't a crime, but she was on Fox News a lot parroting right-wing talking points about radical Islamic terrorism. Well, you can't, if you call it radical Islamic terrorism, you're essentially further emboldening terrorism. It's not, Islam is a religion. What Islam practices, what Islam preaches, is not what the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and of course ISIS practice. Period. It's not. So I think she has to answer for that. I also think, I don't really know enough about this. And in fairness, I don't know enough about it, and I would like to hear from her on it. Before I do that, she also, I find concerning, and she'll have to answer for this, she did vote against the United States taking in more Syrian refugees. In 2015, Gabbard was among a minority of Democrats who voted for additional restrictions on refugees entering the U.S. from Syria and Iraq. She has also previously expressed skepticism that the Assad regime is behind chemical weapons attacks in Syria and aligned herself with nationalist figures such as Narendra Modi of India. Breaking with most Democrats, Gabbard has embraced the use of the phrase radical Islam, a phrase to which many Muslims have evolved into a dog whistle on the right intended to indict the entire Islamic faith. So I was just talking about that. Let me give you a little bit more information on Modi, who she has supported. So this is from Jacobin magazine, but Gabbard is less discerning when autocrats aren't motivated by, quote, radical Islam. In November 2015, she traveled to Egypt as part of a congressional delegation and met Egyptian dictator Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, part of an effort to strengthen U.S.-Egypt relations. Sisi may be a blood-soaked tyrant who's killed hundreds of Egyptians and imprisoned many thousands more, but as Gabbard made clear at the time, he's tough where it counts. Quote, President el-Sisi had shown great courage and leadership in taking on this extremist Islamist ideology while also fighting against ISIS militarily to keep them from gaining a foothold in Egypt, Gabbard said, urging U.S. political leaders to, quote, recognize President el-Sisi and his leadership and, quote, stand with him in this fight against Islamic extremists. Some of the Sisi government's fantastic accomplishments in this fight include killing a group of Mexican tourists and quite possibly torturing and murdering an Italian PhD student. But perhaps Gabbard's closest friend on the world stage is India's Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's an ideal match in many respects, not because the two happen to share a faith. Gabbard is the first Hindu American in Congress, but because they both harbor noxious attitudes towards Muslims. I don't know if I agree with that, as far as Gabbard holding noxious attitudes towards Muslims. Modi began his career as an activist in Rashtriya, I'm going to fuck this up, Swayamsevak Sangh, a right-wing nationalist organization that stokes anti-Muslim sentiment in the country and has been banned 4 separate times. One of its members assassinated Gandhi over accusations he was appeasing Muslims. While Modi eventually left the RSS for his current party, the BJP, the two are heavily connected. The RSS mobilized to get Modi elected, and several BJP officials used to be members of the RSS. Shortly after September 11th, Modi claimed on TV that Islam has tried to, quote, put a flag in the whole world since the 14th century, and that the situation today is the result of that. As he campaigned for elections in 2014, he threatened to deport undocumented immigrants from Bangladesh who are mostly Muslim, calling them, quote, infiltrators. But most appealing was his role in the 2002 anti-Muslim riots in the western state of Gujarat, which left 1,000 people dead, nearly 800 of them Muslim. Modi was the state's chief administrator at the time and has long been accused of allowing the riots to happen, with a former senior police officer testifying in 2011 that Modi said the night before the riots that Muslims needed to be taught a lesson. So, I have many thoughts. Number one, I don't have a problem with Tulsi Gabbard. I don't have a problem with Tulsi Gabbard meeting with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. I think it's mostly propaganda on the neoliberal democratic establishment against her. I'd rather meet with Bashar al-Assad and see if we could come to a political solution to end the Syrian war than the United States having boots on the ground and the United States supplying weapons to Al-Qaeda. The United States has directly and indirectly been supplying weapons and working with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. Because, when we work with the rebels, a lot of times we don't even know who the hell the rebels are. By the way, the United States was also supplying weapons to Ukrainian neo-Nazis. If you follow the Ukrainians episode in 2014, I believe that was. They were neo-Nazis that the United States were calling, the democratic rebels in Ukraine. So I don't have a problem with her meeting with Bashar al-Assad. I have to look into this guy Modi more, but it sounds like a terrible dictator, authoritarian, totalitarianism, whatever you want to call it, that she should not be praising. I also think, in general, one thing that Tulsi Gabbard is going to have to answer for is her views on the root cause of terrorism. I want to respect Tulsi Gabbard because she served in the military. She was out in the Middle East, and I was not. So I'm speaking as I'm not a war veteran. I wasn't on the ground there. Obviously, a lot of her views are informed by what she saw in Iraq and Afghanistan and what I did not see. So I respect her service, and I would like to hear what she has to say. With that said, the bottom line is this. The root cause of terrorism is not, quote, radical Islamic terrorism. The root cause of what forms terrorism is the United States invading foreign countries, regime changing, and basically murdering Muslims around the world. That is what's caused terrorism. I am certainly, to be clear, not defending Osama bin Laden, but there's a reason Osama bin Laden created Al-Qaeda. It was because the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and by the way, guess who worked to supply and fund Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan after the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan? That would be the United States of America. I would say more accurately called the United Corporations of America. We are responsible for Osama bin Laden by basically working with and supporting and funding Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden against the evil boogeyman, the Soviet Union. You don't really hear that on CNN or the New York Times, do you? And by the way, we're responsible for ISIS. This notion that ISIS was formed because we left Iraq. No, ISIS was formed because we went to Iraq in the first place. Would you like it if, a foreign country came into your town and occupied it and murdered your friends and your family members? I don't think so. So I like what Tulsi Gabbard stands for as far as foreign policy, but I don't like this talk of radical Islamic terrorists. She has the credibility as a war veteran to make the case. These wars are starting. These wars are happening in the first place. Terrorism is happening in the first place because we are invading mostly sovereign countries and essentially spreading our, democracy, which doesn't even exist, on other people. And it radicalizes terrorists when we drone them, when we bomb them, when we kill their family, when we kill their friends, when they kill their teachers, whomever.